Dave and Kilroy was here. We have a real treat. The movie 12 O'Clock High, starring Gregory Peck. It's one of the first movies made after the war that used actual footage from the war. And it's a powerful story about how military leadership works and how human beings sometimes get broken by the things that go on during military service. It is a fabulous movie, and I think you will all have a great time if you come with me and see Kilroy Was Here during 12 O'Clock High. 12 O'Clock High is a tremendously effective birth announcement for the United States Air Force. Now I know the movie's set in World War II, and in World War II there was no Air Force. The Air Force was a part of the Army. The United States Army Air Corps had been around for World War I, World War II, and it performed a variety of missions as a part of the Army, largely in support of the Army's strategic priorities. What this meant was, during World War II, the Army Air Corps provided a significant amount of close air support to ground troops advancing across battlefields. But it wasn't that mission that caused President Truman to create the United States Air Force. You see, in 1947, in the National Security Act, President Truman created not only the Department of Defense, bringing together the War Department, which controlled the Army, and the Navy Department, which controlled the Navy. It also created the United States Air Force as a separate armed service in the Department of Defense. And the Air Force, it turns out, would have slightly different priorities than the Army had, and as a result, the Army Air Corps mission would shift significantly as those same people became generals in the United States Air Force. By 1949, the uniforms that the Air Force wore, which had been Army green and brown, were now blue. The blue came from the Royal Air Force because the United States Air Force had spent World War II as the Army Air Corps watching the Royal Air Force negotiate and gain significant power and concessions within the government during the war. And they believed that that separate identity, distinct from the Army, was important to achieving that goal. So, by 1949, the Army brown uniform, which had been wearing Air Force Airman chevrons on the sleeves for enlisted soldiers, became the Oxbridge blue Royal Air Force colored United States Air Force uniform. And the focus of the Air Force, rather than the close Army support role of the Army Air Corps, became overwhelmingly strategic. That means big bombers flying very high, very fast, dropping impressive payloads of death and destruction in order to control the strategic environment where war occurred. Now, of course, they would also maintain air superiority with fighter craft designed to protect those strategic bombers. And so 12 O'Clock High, with its story about the Army Air Corps' first attempt to gain air superiority over contested airspace in Germany, and then use that air superiority to decimate the country that they're fighting's ability to fight war, would become the perfect encapsulation of the Air Force's mission going into the 1950s. Now, the timing of this movie was specifically intended to make it clear that the Air Force was its own distinct thing. And to this day, most Air Force veterans I talk with hail this movie as being the first movie that expresses what's best in the Air Force. Now, as I mentioned, the Air Force was created by law in 1947, but they were wearing their first specific to the Air Force uniforms in 1949. 12 O'Clock High premiered December 21st, 1949, and went into general release in January 1950. So at the exact same time, when members of the Air Force would start stepping out into the streets in blue uniforms, calling back to the Royal Air Force, they would also have a main
It's up here, where a bunch of boys get to be nothing but a set of numbers. That's what's the trouble.
Do they know up here what my boys have been taking for 3 days in a row? That they'll be up again all night to get 18 in the air for tomorrow? How much do you think they can take? Do you know they're falling asleep at briefing? Are you going to drive them till they crack?
Take it easy, Keith.
Take it easy. Bomber Command can take it easy. Those boys are flesh and blood. They'll die for you, but they've got to have a chance, and they know they haven't got one. Frank, they can have. They know a man's chances run out in 15 missions. Somebody's got to give them a limit, a goal, some hope of living. What do you guys think they're made of?
Look, Keith. Yes, sir?
Just got the reports from the groups. Going up, Frank?
I'll be there in a minute, sir. Those things are coming, Keith. Replacements. Combat limits. But right now, the deal is to hang on. And look, Keith, you've got to find a way to save yourself a little. You can't carry all the load. It's too big. Frank.
There's a hole in the dike, Frank. I'm scared stiff. Maybe you know how deep all this goes, and maybe you don't. I've got to spill it anyhow. We're fighting all over the world. Every theater commander is screaming for crews and equipment. 50,000 airplanes. That's what they say they're building. I wish we had 500. Our problem right now narrows down to one group. If the 9/18 folds, it can spread to the other three groups. It can fold the whole deal. There's only one hope of shortening this war: daylight precision bombing. If we fold, daylight bombing is done with. I don't know. Maybe it means the whole show. We could lose the war if we don't knock out German industry. You can smell what's coming, Frank. I'm promising you nothing except a job no man should have to do who's already had more than his share of combat. I've got to ask you to take nice kids and fly them until they can't take anymore. And then put them back in and fly them some more. We've got to find out what a maximum effort is. How much a man can take and get it all. I don't even know if any man can do it. That's what cracked Keith. What time do you think you can get down there tomorrow?
Early, I guess.
No squawks?
Pretty hard to have one, the way you put it.
Thanks, Frank.
Stoval? I hope you enjoyed the hat, Mr. Stoval, and a pleasant voyage home to you.
Well, thank you. I'd like to thank you for something else, too. Well, back home, I'd buy a hat in 5 minutes. Thank you for a most enjoyable hour and 40 minutes.
It was a pleasure. Come back soon, Mr. Stoval.
Not again.
In 1942, as the war in Europe settled into a long, ugly slog on the Eastern Front, a few brave Americans came to England to set up an entirely new kind of war. 12 O'Clock High captures the story of the strategic bombing campaign that was conducted from England over the course of 1942. Veterans like Lieutenant Colonel Stoval, who had seen Europe in the First War, where airplanes were used as scout craft and fighter craft, but rarely as bombers, would see massive 4-engine bombers take to the sky as they coordinated a vast strategic bombing effort from dozens of bases all across England. The core of this mission was an innovative new aircraft, the B-17 Flying Fortress. This 4-engined, powerful bomber was designed to do something that no bomber had been built to do before: fly hundreds of miles, deliver thousands of pounds of bombs in the face of hostile fighter aircraft and anti-aircraft fire, and come home alive. The key to the success of this mission was first the sturdiness of the frame. The plane was built to survive multiple impacts from any kind of cannon or flak anti-aircraft fire and continue to fire. It was designed to be able to fly with only 2 engines, but most importantly, it was built with overlapping fields of anti-aircraft gun emplacements, so that whatever angle an enemy approached from, they would receive a reply in fire in turn. Now, that being said, the weakest spot of a B-17's defensive armament was from head-on and from above. For that reason, the 12 o'clock high call was the call most feared by the pilots of the B-17, because a 12 o'clock high attacker means that the attacker is coming from directly above and at the high point. That angle was the most difficult for a B-17 gunning crew to successfully defend against an attacking fighter aircraft. To help overcome that weakness, and the simple weakness that comes from any relatively slow-moving object being pursued by fast-moving fighters, the B-17 fighting technique was not just one of one plane, but rather of a series of 3 squadrons. There would be a high squadron, a lead squadron, a low squadron. These 3 squadrons would fly at different altitudes and in a formation that would spread out their overlapping fields of fire to the greatest degree possible. In the movie, this is portrayed very dramatically by Gregory Peck making clear how important it is that they maintain proper spacing and that they maintain formation, and that formation be tight. The tightness of the formation was designed to make sure that there would be no gaps in the range of the anti-aircraft guns that a fighter could use to exploit and attack a B-17. This work was incredibly difficult, requiring tremendous bravery, and in the movie, we have a number of real-world people who are portrayed as fictional characters. For example, we have Major General Frank Armstrong, who largely plays the character who is played by Colonel General Frank Savage. Frank Armstrong led the 306th Bombing Group, one of the first bombing groups to fly over Germany, with an 87% casualty rate. That means of the 287 who flew to England in October of 1942, only 87 survived the war. There's also Major General Acre, who is played in the movie as Major General Pritchard, the commanding general of the entire 306th Bombing Group. Then there's Colonel Davenport. Lieutenant Colonel Davenport in the movie is actually Colonel Overacre, a commander with a great heart, but who also struggled a little bit with over-identification with his men and the desire to save their lives. It was Colonel Armstrong, who was portrayed by General Frank Savage, who innovated the focus of put your fear at the front and center and let it already embrace you as if you are dead. Because the truth is, only with victory are we coming home alive. In that, he managed to forge the 306th Bomber Group into an incredibly courageous outfit that set the tone for what would be a maximum effort by the strategic bombing effort in World War II. Ultimately, that would turn into a 25 mission rule, where after 25 bombing missions over occupied Europe, a flight crew could be deemed to have done their bit for combat and return home safe and sound to do training of other pilots and bomb crew. But before mid-1943, that maximum effort of 25 missions had not been determined. It was men like Major General Frank Armstrong's 306th Bomber Group that set that tone and embodied the fictional story of 12 O'Clock High. Now, over the course of the war, the amount of bombers and tons of bombs dropped on Germany increased steadily, and they did have a noticeable effect. First and foremost, they diverted a significant amount of German aircraft production to fighter production to attempt to stem the tide of strategic bombers. Secondly, they caused a tremendous amount of lost man-hours, hours spent rebuilding destroyed factories and equipment. It didn't win the war. The Red Army did that. But it did open up a lot of eyes to the possibility of how bombing could change national policy. And so, as a result of that, the work done by the 8th Air Force in England in World War II largely came to define the preferred mission of the Air Force in the Cold War era: high-altitude precision bombing delivered by strategic bombing crews. That is the reason why the Army Air Corps symbol would turn into a version of the Air Force symbol.
Newton's high squadron, low squadron, here they come. 12 o'clock high. Watch it count, they're heading for the high squadron.
Frank.
Flasher beacon 9, Navigator. Set course for combat wing assembly line. Roger. Field gunner, let me know when the other groups tack on to me. Roger.
Briefing for a practice mission at 1100 this morning. That's right, practice. I've been sent down here to take over what has come to be known as a hard luck group. Well, I don't believe in hard luck. So we're going to find out what the trouble is. Maybe part of it's your flying, so we're going back to fundamentals. And I can tell you now one reason I think you've been having hard luck. I saw it in your faces last night. I can see it there now. You've been looking at a lot of air lately. You think you ought to have a rest. In short, you're sorry for yourselves. Now, I don't have a lot of patience with this what are we fighting for stuff. We're in a war, a shooting war. We've got to fight. And some of us have got to die. I'm not trying to tell you not to be afraid. Fear is normal. But stop worrying about it and about yourselves. Stop making plans. Forget about going home. Consider yourselves already dead. Once you accept that idea, it won't be so tough. Now, if any man here can't buy that, if he rates himself as something special, with a special kind of hide to be saved, he'd better make up his mind about it right now. Because I don't want him in this group. I'll be in my office in 5 minutes. You can see me there.
So the most amazing thing about 12 O'Clock High for me as a veteran is just how much the real life experience of being in combat and leading people in combat affects you. In this movie, we see very early after World War II a character who leads difficultly, leads through difficult times and through difficult challenges, but also feels the weight of it. And in Major Stoval, we see a character who, like myself, is mostly in a support role and who observes this and feels it very deeply. 12 O'Clock High stands very well with veterans and leadership teachers about how terrifically it tells the story of war and combat. As a 2021 audience watches 12 O'Clock High, a few things stand out. First and foremost is this is obviously a movie made in its time. It's not a nuanced look of the entire pros and cons of the war. Rather, it's the story of the pilots and aircrew of B-17 bombers as they are conducting a mission over Europe at tremendously high personal cost. But it's also a story about memory and how memory is retained in things and how meaning is retained in things. Obviously, General Savage's speech is a tremendously useful leadership tool whenever someone needs to get a group of people to face their fears and focus on the mission. In fact, as a veteran, one of the defining qualities of being a veteran is that idea of mission focus, the idea that my own personal experience may be valid, but it's simply not relevant as we go through this current operation. But another thing that stood out to me, and that is missed by a lot of reviewers of 12 O'Clock High, is how certain items stand in for an entire experience. First, the Robin Hood mug. That jug, that porcelain jug that Lieutenant Colonel Stoval finds in the secondhand shop and puts back at the airbase, embodied for him, and I suspect for everyone else in the air group, the moment when you stop getting to be yourself and you start being a part of the bomber group. When that mug gets turned around, all individuality disappears in the mission. The second is the RAF pilot boots that General Savage got for Lieutenant Colonel Keith Davenport, and that General Savage ended up wearing himself when he replaced Keith Davenport. These boots, in their own way, are like Excalibur, or the Holy Grail, or any other symbol, maybe even a crown, a object that carries with it the weight of command and responsibility. The boots show up recurring 3 times. They show up in the movie, once when Savage gives them to Davenport, once when Savage puts them on himself to take over command, and once when Davenport takes them off of Savage at the end of his command, when his catatonic break from all the trauma he has sustained causes him to need to stop. It is in these things that I think we find the true meaning of 12 O'Clock High, and it is not that service doesn't carry a cost, and it is not that courage is the only answer. It is rather that some things are important enough that they call for your courage, even when the cost could be your life or your own ability to focus. It is this, and that truth, that I think makes 12 O'Clock High an outstanding movie for anyone to watch today, regardless of whether or not you're a fan of strategic bombing or the Air Force. And if you are an Air Force veteran, I would be hard-pressed to imagine a movie that more elegantly and bravely captures the best of what that service is. If you have thoughts about 12 O'Clock High, please feel free to share them in the comments section. Let's get a dialogue going, because this 1949 film still has a lot of life, for me at least, watching it in 2021.
tower.
Tower.
You got it counted, Captain?
Put him in this bag. 19 return, sir.
The boys really did it today.
I made it. 19 of them. Who led?
Ben Gately.
Good, is he? Back all right?
Yes, Frankie's back.
Kilroy Was Here is a product of the Evocati Legal Services Foundation, Matt Broman, President. This project, and every other project of the Evocati Legal Services Foundation, is done to bring awareness and support to veterans and active duty service members. If you want to be a part of our project, please join us over at www.evocati.org.in. We are committed to serving those who have served us all.